Kale stood in the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, feeling the weight of the eyes watching him. The room was filled with cold, calculating aliens who sat in their high chairs, each with their own agenda. Their leader, Empress Farkara, stared down at him from her elevated throne with an expression that could freeze a sun. The mission was simple, or so they thought. Eliminate the Mordrax, a terrifying creature that had been terrorizing planets across the galaxy. Do not fail us, human, Empress Farkara's voice echoed through the chamber. She was known for her ruthlessness, and her eyes burned with disdain as she spoke. The other council members, a mix of alien species with bright alien features, murmured among themselves, clearly underestimating Kale. Kale had heard the whispers. They thought he was just another expendable soldier, someone to send into a death trap with no chance of survival. The mission seemed impossible. He would be landing on Zorath 5, a planet so hostile that no one had ever returned from it. But Kale didn't flinch. He had survived worse, and he wasn't about to let the Empress or anyone else decide his fate. The plan was set. Kale would be sent to Zorath 5 alone, armed with only basic survival gear. The Mordrax, a massive reptilian creature with razor-sharp claws and fire-like eyes, was said to be the deadliest predator in the galaxy. The aliens believed that sending Kale to face the beast would rid them of a problem and get rid of him in the process. They were wrong. Kale was no ordinary man. He was a survivor, a man who had faced death before and lived to tell the tale. This time would be no different. As he boarded the transport ship, he felt the cold weight of his fate settling over him. Alone and far from home, he was about to step into the unknown. The ship's engines hummed softly, and Kale gazed out the viewport as the stars stretched into long streaks, the ship accelerating through the void. He didn't know what awaited him on Zorath 5, but he wasn't afraid. If anything, he was angry. Angry at the Council for thinking they could simply dispose of him, angry at the way they treated him like a pawn. The journey was long, and the silence in the ship was almost oppressive. Kale took inventory of his gear, a survival pack, a laser rifle with limited ammunition, and a communicator that would allow him to report back if he survived long enough. He wondered if he would make it. He'd never faced anything like the Mordrax before, but he had faced worse. The creatures that lived in the barren wastelands of his homeworld had taught him how to survive in impossible conditions. He had learned how to think on his feet, how to use his environment to his advantage. This would be no different. As the ship broke through the atmosphere and touched down on Zorath 5's rocky surface, Kale felt the ground tremble beneath him. The air outside was thick with sulfur, the sky a sickly red hue, and the ground cracked open with veins of glowing lava. It was a planet designed to kill. He stepped out of the ship, the heat overwhelming at first, but he steadied himself. His mission was clear: find the Mordrax, kill it, and return to the Council. But as he gazed at the horizon, where jagged mountains loomed like the teeth of some great monster, Kale realized something. This mission might not be about killing at all. As his boots crunched against the rocky ground, Kale decided he wouldn't be so quick to follow the Council's orders. The Mordrax wasn't a simple beast. There was more to this creature, and Kale was going to find out what it was, even if it meant defying everything the Council believed. This mission was about to take an unexpected turn, and Kale couldn't wait to see where it would lead. Little did he know, the Mordrax was already watching him from the shadows, waiting for its moment. Kale ventured deeper into the barren landscape of Zorath 5, the strange red skies casting an eerie glow on the jagged mountains that surrounded him. The air was thick with a sulfuric scent, and every step he took seemed to echo in the silence. His boots crunched against the rocky ground as he made his way through the treacherous terrain, keeping a sharp eye out for any sign of the Mordrax. But as the minutes turned into hours, there was no sign of the creature. Nothing but the harsh landscape and the unsettling quiet of the planet. The further he walked, the more the planet seemed to press in on him. The air felt heavier, as if the very atmosphere was trying to smother him. Sweat beaded on his forehead, not from the heat, but from the strange, unsettling feeling that he was being watched. It was a feeling he knew all too well. He had faced countless dangers in his life, but the tension in the air here was different. It wasn't just the planet's hostile environment. It was something else, something unseen, lurking in the shadows. As Cal climbed a steep incline, his hand gripping the rocky ledge for support, he heard it, a low growl that sent a shiver down his spine. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound came from below, echoing up from the depths of a nearby canyon. Cal's instincts kicked in, and he crouched low, trying to make himself as invisible as possible. The growl grew louder, and Cal could feel the ground beneath him vibrating as something massive moved through the canyon. His breath caught in his throat as a massive shape emerged from the shadows, its silhouette a towering figure in the dim light. It was the Mordrax. Cal's mind raced. This was it. The creature was real, and it was right in front of him. The Mordrax's enormous reptilian body moved with terrifying grace, its dark scales glistening in the dim light. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Cal, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The beast's powerful muscles rippled as it surveyed its prey, the tension in the air thickening with every passing second. Cal's hand instinctively reached for the laser rifle slung across his back, but before he could make a move, the Mordrax let out another deafening roar that sent a shockwave through the canyon. The sound was so intense that it rattled his bones, and Cal staggered back, almost losing his balance. The beast was faster than he had anticipated. It lunged at him with terrifying speed, its claws swiping through the air just inches from his face. Cal barely managed to dive to the side, rolling behind a jagged rock for cover. His heart raced as he scrambled to his feet, quickly assessing the situation. He had no intention of killing the creature, not yet, anyway. The Mordrax was a force of nature, but Cal had fought bigger beasts before. What troubled him was the way the creature moved, the way its eyes seemed to almost study him. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The Mordrax circled him, its movements slow and deliberate, almost like it was toying with him. Cal's mind raced. What was this creature? Why was it behaving like this? He needed to stay focused. His survival depended on it. Suddenly, something strange happened. As the Mordrax circled him, it stopped, its gaze shifting from hostile to curious. The creature cocked its head, as if studying Cal in a way that didn't seem to be born out of malice. Cal froze, not sure whether this was some kind of trick or if the beast was trying to communicate. His hand remained firmly on his rifle, but he didn't raise it. A new, unexpected sound filled the air, a soft, almost melodic hum. The sound wasn't coming from the Mordrax, but from somewhere behind him. Cal's eyes widened as he turned toward the source of the noise, a strange feeling settling in his gut. Something was happening here, something that didn't fit with the story the council had told him. As he turned back toward the Mordrax, Cal realized the creature's behavior was shifting. Instead of attacking, it was waiting, almost as if it was waiting for something. Cal's pulse quickened. What was going on? Why wasn't it attacking him? Had something changed? Before Cal could process what was happening, a deep rumble echoed through the canyon. It wasn't the Mordrax. It was something else. Something bigger. The ground trembled beneath Cal's feet, and he quickly looked around, his heart racing as the true danger of Zorath 5 made itself known. In the distance, emerging from the shadows, was another creature, one even larger and more menacing than the Mordrax. This was the true predator of the planet, and Cal was standing right in its path. Cal's breath caught in his throat as the massive creature stepped into view. It was larger than any monster he had ever seen. Its body was covered in thick, spiked armor, and its eyes glowed an eerie shade of yellow. The ground shook with each step it took, its claws scraping the rocky terrain beneath it. This was no ordinary predator. This was a force of nature, something born from the planet itself to reign supreme over everything that lived here. The Mordrax, still circling Kale, took a few cautious steps back, seemingly aware of the new threat. Cal's heart raced. The situation had just escalated from bad to worse. He had thought the Mordrax was the biggest danger on Zorath 5, but now he realized that the creature was nothing more than an underling, a guard for something far more terrifying. Cal's mind worked quickly, trying to assess his options. The creature before him was massive, at least 3 times the size of the Mordrax. Its armor-like scales shimmered in the dim light, and it had an intimidating set of horns that jutted out from its head. Its massive jaws opened, revealing rows of sharp teeth that could easily crush bone. Kale didn't know what kind of creature this was, but one thing was certain: it was out of his league. The beast's low growl filled the air, vibrating in Cal's chest. It was so deep that it seemed to come from the very core of the planet. Cal's legs felt like they were made of stone, but he forced himself to stand tall, trying not to show fear. His mind raced for a plan, anything that could help him survive this encounter. The Mordrax, sensing the power of the new arrival, hesitated for a moment, its posture shifting from aggressive to more defensive. It wasn't challenging the new beast, it was backing away, clearly intimidated. Cal couldn't help but feel a twinge of confusion. Why was the Mordrax acting this way? Was it protecting him? That didn't make any sense. The creature had been a deadly threat just moments ago, and now it was almost as if it was serving him. Before Cal could make sense of the situation, the larger beast charged forward with an astonishing speed. Its massive claws dug into the ground, sending rocks flying as it lunged at the Mordrax. Cal's eyes widened in shock as the two beasts collided in a violent explosion of fury and power. The Mordrax, despite its size, was no match for the larger creature. The air was filled with the sounds of screeching and crashing as the two monsters fought for dominance. Cal didn't waste any time. His instincts kicked in, and he began to retreat, keeping a careful eye on the battle unfolding before him. This was a fight he couldn't afford to get caught in. His rifle, still strapped to his back, felt like dead weight. It wouldn't be enough to stop either of these monsters. He needed something else, something he could use to his advantage. As he backed away, Cal's mind raced. He had to get to higher ground. From there, he might have a chance to assess the situation and figure out what was going on. The creatures were too preoccupied with each other to notice him, at least for now. He found a jagged rock outcrop that jutted out from the side of a cliff and scrambled up. Using every ounce of strength, he had to reach a safe vantage point. From the top of the cliff, Cal could see the full extent of the battle. The larger beast had the Mordrax pinned beneath it, its enormous claws digging into the smaller creature's body. The Mordrax fought back with all its strength, but it was clear that it was outmatched. The larger beast roared triumphantly, lifting the Mordrax off the ground and throwing it several feet into the air. Cal watched, his mind spinning with questions. Why had the Mordrax acted like it was protecting him? Why had it backed away from the larger creature? And most importantly, what was going on? This planet was filled with dangers far beyond his comprehension. As the battle raged below him, Cal knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. He had become part of something much bigger. He had a role to play on Zorath 5, whether he liked it or not. The Mordrax's strange behavior and the appearance of the larger creature were just the beginning of a mystery Cal wasn't sure he was ready to unravel. But as he watched the two beasts clash, Cal made a decision. He wasn't going to let them decide his fate. He had a plan, and he would do whatever it took to survive, whether he had to make an unlikely ally out of the Mordrax or find a way to defeat the larger creature. This was only the beginning of his journey on Zorath 5, and Cal was determined to figure out what lay ahead. Cal stood on the edge of the cliff, heart racing, as he watched the battle below. The massive creature, which he had now named Vrax, roared triumphantly as it pinned the Mordrax beneath its crushing claws. Despite the viciousness of the fight, something inside Cal felt uneasy. The Mordrax wasn't just a mindless beast. It had shown intelligence, and its strange, almost protective behavior toward Kale left him with more questions than answers. His eyes locked on the two battling creatures, their massive forms rolling and clashing like forces of nature. The Mordrax was smaller, but it was quick, using its agility to strike at Vrax's exposed sides. Kale could tell the smaller beast was desperate, fighting not for victory, but for survival. A deep rumble filled the air as Vrax lifted the Mordrax high, its jaws widening in a deadly arc. The smaller creature struggled, its claws scraping against the massive beast's scales, but Vrax was relentless. Kale's instinct screamed at him to intervene, to do something before the Mordrax was crushed completely. But he knew that with nothing but a few tools at his disposal, he was no match for either of these creatures. Suddenly, the ground beneath Kale's feet trembled. His hands gripped the rocky edge as the vibrations grew stronger. Was it another earthquake? He glanced down to the battle below, but Vrax and the Mordrax continued their brutal fight, seemingly unaware of the shifting ground. Then Kale heard it, a faint, rumbling noise from deep within the cliffs. The earth cracked, and with a violent roar, a massive rock formation collapsed just beyond the battlefield. Kale's breath caught in his throat as the dust settled, revealing the hidden passageway, its entrance large enough to fit the beasts. Something in his gut told him this wasn't a coincidence. The passage wasn't just some random cave. It was meant to be discovered, and it led somewhere important. Kale's thoughts raced as he weighed his options. The battle between Vrax and the Mordrax continued, their roars echoing through the valley. Kale knew that if he didn't act fast, one or both of them could turn their attention toward him. But the passage seemed like an opportunity, a possible escape route, or even a way to find the answers he so desperately needed. Without hesitation, Kale turned away from the cliff's edge and made his way toward the newly revealed entrance. His feet scrambled over the rocks, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what lay beyond that passage, but he wasn't about to let fear hold him back now. He was already in a strange and dangerous world, and the only way to survive was to take risks. The air around the entrance was thick with an eerie energy, as though the passage itself was alive, waiting to be explored. Kale hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the darkness. The walls of the passage were smooth, almost unnaturally so, as though carved by intelligent hands long ago. As he ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and an odd sensation prickled at the back of his neck. Kale had the unsettling feeling that he was being watched. He paused for a moment, listening, but all he could hear was the distant rumble of the creatures fighting above. His instincts told him to keep moving. Whatever secrets this passage held, they were worth more than staying in the open and waiting for the beasts to finish their fight. His mind raced with the possibilities. What kind of civilization had built this tunnel? Who had lived here before? The passage seemed ancient, older than anything Kale had seen on Zorath 5. The alien planet was full of mysteries, but this was something different, something bigger than just a strange wildlife encounter. The sense of purpose behind the hidden tunnel was clear, as though it was leading him toward something significant. As Kale pressed on, the passage began to narrow. The walls closed in on him, and he had to duck to avoid scraping his head against the stone. His breath echoed in the confined space, and each step he took felt like it was taking him further into the unknown. The passage twisted and turned, guiding him deeper into the heart of the planet. Every inch felt like a step closer to uncovering something that had been buried for centuries, or perhaps millennia. What had the Mordrax been protecting? Why had it behaved so differently toward Kale? And now, with Vrax still wreaking havoc above, Kale had to wonder, was this passage his only hope, or was it part of something far more dangerous than he could imagine? With each step, Kale felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. The truth about Zorath 5, the creatures, and his place in all of this was just out of reach, but he was determined to find it. There was no turning back now. Kale's footsteps echoed through the narrow passage as he continued his descent into the darkness. The air was thick with an ancient, stagnant scent, and the walls, now slick with moisture, seemed to pulse with a strange energy. His heart pounded in his chest with every step, but his curiosity pushed him forward. He had to know what lay at the end of this path. There was something calling him, some hidden force beneath the surface of this planet that he could not ignore. After what felt like hours, Cale reached a large chamber. The tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous room, its walls lined with carvings and symbols that Cale could barely comprehend. The designs looked alien, not just in their shapes but in their energy, as if they were alive, swirling with an unsettling glow. The room was dimly lit, but there was enough light for Cale to see the massive structure in the center of the chamber. It was a temple. The architecture was unlike anything Cale had ever seen, an enormous stone structure, ancient and worn, with towering pillars that stretched up to the ceiling. The air around the temple felt charged, as if it had been untouched for centuries. Cale's breath caught in his throat as he approached. He could feel the weight of history, the power of whatever had once stood here. The walls of the temple were adorned with more symbols, strange geometric shapes, and intricate designs that seemed to tell a story, but one Cale couldn't understand. He traced a finger along the stone surface, feeling the grooves and bumps of the symbols. There was something about them that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. These weren't just decorations, they were warnings. Cale's mind raced. What had these symbols meant? Who had built this temple? And why? He took a deep breath and moved forward, determined to find answers. The center of the room held a large altar, its surface cracked and weathered with age. It was empty for now, but Cale could sense the powerful presence that had once radiated from it. Whatever had been placed here, whether it was an artifact or a being, had left its mark on the very stone. As Cale stepped closer, a sudden movement caught his eye. He whipped around, heart hammering in his chest. The light shifted, and for a moment, he could have sworn he saw something. Someone, standing in the shadows. He wasn't alone. Cale's hand instinctively went to the weapon strapped to his side. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face another beast, or if something far more dangerous was lurking in the shadows. But as he squinted into the darkness, the figure remained still, silent, waiting. "Who's there?" Cale called out, his voice echoing in the empty chamber. His pulse quickened, and he felt the weight of the unknown pressing in on him. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. No answer came, only the cold, eerie silence of the ancient temple. Suddenly, the figure stepped forward into the dim light. It wasn't a beast. It was humanoid, tall and lean, its movements graceful but filled with purpose. Its skin shimmered faintly, as if it were made of something not quite solid, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. Cale's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't an alien like any he had encountered before. This was something far more ancient, far more powerful. "You've come," the figure spoke, its voice soft but filled with authority. "I have been waiting for you." Cale's mind raced. Waiting for him. He had no idea who, or what, this being was, but its words sent a chill down his spine. The temple, the strange symbols, the mysterious energy, everything was beginning to feel like it had been set in motion for a reason. But what was that reason? "Who are you?" Cale asked, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. He had come so far. And now, standing before this mysterious being, he needed answers. "I am Asarel," the being said, its eyes narrowing slightly as if measuring Cale's response. "I am the guardian of the forgotten, the keeper of lost knowledge." Cale took a step back, processing the words. Guardian of the forgotten. Lost knowledge. What was this place? What had he stumbled upon? "I have watched your journey," Asarel continued. "You are not the first to come here. Many have tried to uncover the secrets of this world, but none have been worthy. You, Cale of Earth, are different. You are the one who will unlock the truth." The weight of the being's words settled in Cale's chest like a stone. He wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever truth lay ahead, but one thing was clear. His journey had just taken a turn into the unknown, and there was no turning back now. Kale stood frozen in place, his eyes fixed on the figure of Asarel. The words echoed in his mind like a distant drumbeat, each one carrying more weight than the last. You are the one who will unlock the truth. What truth? What was he supposed to find in this forgotten place, and what did it have to do with him? He barely understood the situation, but deep down, he knew there was no turning back now. Asarel's glowing eyes studied Kel with an intensity that made his skin tingle. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken understanding. Kel took a deep breath, forcing his nerves under control. His hand gripped the hilt of his weapon, more out of habit than necessity, but he was ready. Whatever challenge awaited him, he had to face it. The fate of his journey depended on it. You will face 3 trials. Asarel spoke again, its voice steady, as though this was a conversation as old as time. Each trial will test your strength, your mind, and your heart. Only by passing all 3 will you gain the knowledge you seek. Fail, and the truth will remain hidden forever. Kale swallowed hard. 3 trials. It seemed impossible, but it was clear that this was the only way forward. He had come this far, and he couldn't afford to turn back now. What are the trials? He asked, his voice steady, though his heart raced in his chest. Asarel stepped back, its form flickering with a strange light as it gestured to the dark corners of the temple. The walls seemed to shift, as if alive, and the air grew heavier. Kel's senses heightened, and he realized he was standing at the crossroads of something far greater than he had ever imagined. The first trial will challenge your strength, Asarel said. The second will test your mind, and the third will demand everything from your heart. The air around them shimmered, and suddenly, the temple transformed. The ground beneath Cal's feet rumbled, and the walls seemed to dissolve into mist. His surroundings shifted, and he was no longer standing in the grand chamber of the temple. Instead, he found himself in a dense forest, the trees towering overhead like ancient giants. The sound of rustling leaves filled the air, and the scent of damp earth was strong. It felt as if the forest had been plucked from another world entirely. Your first trial begins now. Asarel's voice echoed in the distance, though its form was nowhere to be seen. Face what lies ahead, and prove your strength. Cal's heart thudded in his chest as he surveyed the forest. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, searching for any sign of danger. Suddenly, a low growl pierced the silence. Cal's instincts kicked in, and he spun around, drawing his weapon in one swift motion. From the underbrush emerged a massive creature, a beast unlike anything Cal had ever seen. Its fur was thick and matted. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light. Its fangs were long and sharp, and its claws gleamed like knives. The beast snarled, showing its teeth, and took a step forward. Cal's heart raced, but he didn't hesitate. He knew he had no choice but to fight. This was the first trial, and it was testing his strength. He didn't have time to think about the consequences. He had to defeat this creature. The beast lunged at him with terrifying speed. Cal sidestepped just in time, narrowly avoiding the creature's sharp claws. He swung his weapon, aiming for the beast's side, but it dodged with surprising agility. The battle was fierce and fast, and Cal's muscles burned with every movement. His mind was focused, each swing of his weapon fueled by his desire to survive and move forward. The creature was relentless, its growls shaking the ground beneath them. Cal's mind raced as he struggled to keep up with the beast's attacks. He had fought many battles before, but this was different. There was something primal about the way the creature moved, something that made it almost impossible to predict its next move. But Cal refused to back down. His grip tightened on his weapon as he danced around the creature, searching for an opening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Cal saw it, the creature's vulnerability. In a swift, decisive move, Cal struck, piercing the beast's heart. It let out a final, anguished howl before collapsing to the ground. Cale stood over it, panting heavily, his body covered in sweat. His mind was still racing, but the first trial was complete. He had passed, but there was no time to rest. "You have completed the first trial," HFY said, its voice tinged with approval. "But there is more to come. Your mind will be tested next. Prepare yourself." Cale nodded, already feeling the weight of the next challenge pressing down on him. He had survived the first test, but he knew it wasn't over. Whatever lay ahead, he had to be ready. Cale stood in the center of the chamber, the weight of the previous trial still heavy in his chest. His body was sore from the battle with the beast, but his spirit burned with determination. The forest had faded away, and now the air in the temple felt different, charged, like something was building, ready to push him to his limits. HFY's voice echoed around him, a calming yet ominous reminder of what was to come next. "The second trial begins now," HFY declared, its voice resonating with a quiet authority. "This trial will challenge your mind, your ability to reason, to think beyond what you know. You will face puzzles and choices that will test your intellect. Fail, and the truth you seek will slip further from your grasp." Cale took a deep breath. He had no idea what kind of challenge awaited him, but if it was anything like the first, it would be dangerous. His hand instinctively rested on the hilt of his weapon, though he knew he couldn't fight his way through this one. This trial would require something else, something deeper. The air in the room shifted, and Cale blinked as the world around him changed again. He was no longer in the temple. Instead, he stood in the middle of a vast library, its shelves stretching as far as the eye could see. The stone walls seemed to hum with ancient knowledge, and the smell of old paper and ink filled the air. The soft glow of magical light illuminated rows of books, each one containing secrets Cale couldn't even begin to comprehend. But that wasn't the strangest part. In front of him, floating in midair, was a large, intricate puzzle. It was made of shimmering light, its pieces swirling and shifting like a living thing. The pieces constantly moved, never settling in one place, and the puzzle seemed to change its form every time Cale looked away. He knew instantly that this was no ordinary puzzle. It was alive, and it would only reveal its secrets to someone who could unlock its mysteries. The voice of HFY echoed once more. "Solve the puzzle, and you will pass the trial. Fail, and you will be trapped in the maze of your own thoughts, forever lost." Cale frowned. This was no simple test. It wasn't about brute force. It was about the mind, about understanding the puzzle and how it worked. He stepped closer, his fingers twitching with a mix of uncertainty and curiosity. The puzzle's pieces danced just out of reach, mocking him. Cale knew he had to think, to reason his way through it. But where to begin? He watched the puzzle closely, observing its shifting patterns. The pieces didn't just move randomly. There was a rhythm to them, a hidden pattern that he needed to uncover. Slowly, he began to piece together the logic of the puzzle in his mind. Each piece, though constantly shifting, seemed to align in specific ways when Cale focused on them. His mind raced, calculating, adjusting, until, at last, he saw it. The pieces began to slow down, then gradually come together as Cale touched the right ones. A moment of silence passed, and then, with a soft click, the puzzle locked into place. The light around it dimmed, and the puzzle dissolved into a brilliant burst of energy. Cale took a step back, blinking in surprise. He had done it. The puzzle had been solved, but there was no time to celebrate. As the puzzle disappeared, the library began to shake, its shelves rattling as if the entire structure was coming alive. The walls around Cale twisted, and suddenly, he found himself surrounded by countless doors, each one leading to a different path. A voice boomed in the air, almost as if mocking him. "You have solved the first part, Cale, but now you must choose the right path. The wrong choice will lead you astray." Cale's heart skipped a beat. The challenge wasn't over. This was the real test. Choosing the correct door, the right path forward. His mind whirred with possibilities. He had no way of knowing which door led to the truth, which path would get him closer to unlocking the mysteries of this place. The pressure was immense. He could feel the weight of Asarel's eyes upon him, watching his every move. His breath quickened, and for a moment, doubt crept into his mind. What if he chose wrong? What if all of this, his journey, the trials, his purpose, was for nothing? But Cale shook off the fear. This wasn't about chance. It was about trust. Trusting in his instincts, his experience, and his reasoning. He had faced beasts and battles. But this was something different. This was about understanding. And so, Cale closed his eyes, centered himself, and trusted in the path he would choose. With a steady hand, he walked toward the door that seemed most familiar, the one that called to him in the quietest moments of his mind. As he placed his hand on the handle, the door creaked open slowly, and the air around him shifted once more. The truth was waiting. He could feel it. Cale stepped through the door, his heart racing as the world around him shifted once more. This time, there was no puzzle, no trial, no maze of illusions. He found himself standing in an expansive hall, its ceiling so high that it seemed to disappear into the very stars themselves. The air was cool, filled with a sense of calm. But beneath it, Cale could feel the tension of something monumental approaching. This was it, the final moment of his journey. In the center of the hall stood a towering figure. She was cloaked in a flowing robe made of silver light, her presence as powerful as the stars themselves. Cale's breath caught in his throat as he realized who it was. Asarel, the ancient being who had guided him through every trial, every challenge. The very essence of wisdom and mystery stood before him, her eyes gleaming with knowledge that seemed to stretch across eons. "You've come far, Cale." Asarel's voice resonated, calm and soothing, yet filled with an undeniable authority. "You have faced the trials, solved the puzzles, and chosen the right paths. But now you must face the final revelation." Cale stood tall, his mind focused. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the culmination of everything he had learned. The truth, the knowledge he had sought, was finally within his grasp. His body still ached from the previous trials, but his spirit was sharp, ready to confront whatever awaited him. "Asarel," Cale spoke, his voice steady. "I have followed your guidance. I have trusted the path you set before me. What is this final revelation? What must I face to complete my journey?" Asarel smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her expression. "You have done well, Cale. But now you must understand something deeper, something that goes beyond the trials. This journey was never just about your strength, your intellect, or even your ability to choose wisely. It was about understanding yourself. The truth you seek, the power you crave, all lies within you." Cale's brow furrowed in confusion. He had expected more. Something grand, something earth-shattering. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Asarel's eyes softened. "The trials were a reflection of your inner struggles, Cale. Each test you faced, each challenge you overcame, was a part of you. The fears, the doubts, the strength you didn't even know you had. The beast you fought, the puzzles you solved, and the choices you made. They were all mirrors of your own soul. And now you must face the truth of who you truly are." Cale's mind raced as the words sank in. He had come seeking power, answers, and the truth of his purpose. But now Asarel was telling him that everything he had fought for was about discovering his true self. His eyes scanned the vast hall, the walls, the stars. It was all connected. His journey, the trials, even the strange forces that had guided him. He had thought he was chasing a power outside himself, but the power he had sought had always been within him. "Asarel," Cale said slowly, "what is the truth I must face? How do I embrace this power within me?" Asarel's gaze softened further, and she raised her hand, the silver light around her intensifying. "The truth is that you have always been the key to your own destiny. The trials were meant to awaken the strength, the courage, and the wisdom that already existed within you. It was never about gaining something external. It was about unlocking what was already there, hidden beneath layers of fear and doubt. Cale stood in stunned silence, the weight of Asarel's words pressing down on him. His entire journey, every battle, every puzzle, every choice, it had all been a path to self-discovery. He had thought that victory lay in conquering external forces, but it was his own inner strength that had always held the power. The realization was both humbling and liberating. Asarel's voice echoed one last time. Now, Cale, you must choose. Will you accept your true self and embrace the power that is yours by right, or will you continue to search for answers outside yourself, forever chasing what has always been within you? Cale took a deep breath, his eyes closing as the weight of his journey settled into his soul. He knew now what he had to do. He opened his eyes, meeting Asarel's gaze with newfound resolve. I choose to embrace who I truly am. Asarel nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. Then you have passed the final trial, Cale. The truth has been revealed, and you are ready to shape your destiny. With that, a hall shimmered, and the stars above seemed to brighten, as if acknowledging Cale's decision. His journey had come to an end, but in truth, it was only the beginning. The power was his. The future was his to shape, and for the first time, Cale felt truly free.